A new skyline. Introduction. What would Paris be without the Eiffel Tower, or London without its famous clock tower Big Ben? All over the world, cities are recognizable by the silhouette of the structures reaching skyward to form their unique skylines. Architecture and skylines are unique identifiers of places, just as your fingerprints are one of a kind identifiers of you. Unlike fingerprints, however, skylines don't stay the same forever. They change, sometimes gradually, and at other times quite suddenly. New York City is a great example of the place whose skyline has seen both kinds of changes. Skyscrapers have risen, fallen, and risen again. From its start to the Dutch colony to its current status as the major world hub, New York's skyline has evolved to reflect the changing times. Growing the Big Apple, New York City wasn't always a towering metropolis. It began as a Dutch trade outpost in the 17th century. When in 1609 explorer Henry Hudson sailed to Half Moon into the mouth of the river that would eventually bear his name and called the port New Amsterdam. Eventually, New Amsterdam was taken over by British and renamed New York. The British port continued to expand and grow well into the 1700s. By the time the American Revolution had begun, 4,000 buildings were tightly packed on the streets of southern Manhattan Island. Further expansion occurred during the 19th century as New York turned into a major American city with its incredibly diverse population and the skyline grew rapidly. The end of the Civil War in 1865 brought droves of free slaves north in search of work, followed by waves of European immigrants seeking opportunity in American manufacturing and trade centers. Many of these refugees made their home on New York City, Manhattan Island. By the late 1800s, New York was the most densely populated city in the United States. By 1925, it was the most densely populated city in the world. All the city's new residents needed places to live, work, and shop, and the city's border gradually crept northward as new stores, factories, and homes were built. Manhattan Island, however, is only 23 square miles in area. It wasn't long before buildable sites became few and far between. Eventually, there was no more room for the city to expand at ground level. The only place to grow was skyward. To do that, new building methods had to be employed. Up until then, traditional construction methods used walls to support a building's weight. Since the walls on the first floor had to bear the weight of all the floors and the roof above them, they had to be particularly sturdy. Consequently, building height was limited, as there was no practical way to build walls strong enough to support the building with many floors. A new construction method used a steel frame inside the walls to support a structure enormous. Steel beams were connected together to form a building skeleton. Then the walls were hung from the beams, such like curtains, from a rod and attached at the bottom of the floor, which this With this method, the walls of a building's upper floors were not weighing down on the walls beneath them. The bulk of their weight was instead distributed along the steel beams holding them up. Steel frame construction made it possible for buildings to reach new heights. By the turn of the 20th century, New York City housed a number of huge structures, dubbed skyscrapers. Soon, skyscrapers were going up after another, as builders and architects competed to make the world's tallest building. Building an empire. By the 1920s, New York City's skyline had risen to new heights. It was during this time that two of the city's most famous landmarks were built. In 1928, the 77-story Chrysler Building was under construction and locked in a floor-by-floor duel with the title of the world's tallest, with another building being erected nearby. So fierce that the competition for this title was the Chrysler builder smuggled a tall spire onto the top of his structure. The secret plan worked. The Chrysler Building became the world's tallest structure and also the only taller than 1,000 feet. The Chrysler's building region destroyed life. Just blocks away, a steel frame behemoth was rising. The Empire State Building would take a crown for the world's tallest. It also come to define the city it called home. Workers broke down the Empire State Building in January 1930. Amazingly, it was completed just 410 days later, thanks to more than 3,000 workers who contributed skills and labor. The 103-story steel and granite building stood over 1,400 feet tall. 64 elevators carried people from the ground to the 80th floor in less than 1 minute. An outside observation deck on the 86th floor and an inside deck on the 2102nd floor provided the panoramic views of the city. The Empire State Building became the symbol of New York City. It was named one of the 7 wonders of the modern world and was featured in many books and movies. It wore the crown of the world's tallest building for nearly 40 years, until the posed by the twin giants rising downtown. 2 giants rise, then fall. After the Empire State Building was built, the skyscraper construction fell into a slump due to struggling American economy. It was not until 1970 where the city's skyline would grow even higher. In the 1960s, city officials considered building a World Trade Center, a hub for international commerce, in Lower Manhattan. The Port Authority and the New York and New Jersey was a change of the project. Architect Minoru Yamasaki proposed twin towers as a part of the multi-building complex to offices and storefronts. And 110-story towers would include some of the structural innovations. One such innovation was the use of two-frame construction instead of steel frame construction. Each tower would be similar to a hollow square pipe, with vertical columns spaced closely along its exterior perimeter, surrounding the edge of the building with main support columns reduced the number of the interior supports required. This created much more usable floor space. Another innovation was the use of sky lobbies. Buildings high, building high dictates of the number of elevators needed to move people to frigid. Given the size of the towers, Yamazaki proposed an elevator system modeled after the city's subway lines. People could take an express elevator directly to the sky lobby on a higher level while bypassing the floors beneath, and then transfer to the local elevator that would stop at each of the next 10 floors above. This system was an ingenious and efficient way to transport people vertically, reducing the number of elevator shafts needed.